Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Positively Trek. And, in the 90s, TV shows did on a very special episode of Blossom or whatever. Showing my age there. We have a very special episode of Positively Trek for you today. So, first of all, let me welcome my co-host, of course, the wonderful, the amazing Barry DeFord. Barry, how's it going today?
I'm doing great, Dan. We're getting snow and rain and all of the weather that Mother Nature can throw at us right now. But honestly, I drove home with a spring in my step, knowing that we were going to have this discussion tonight. Honestly, Nothing can get me down.
Definitely. You mentioned the rain. I took my dog out earlier for a walk, and we got about 2 houses down. She stopped dead in her tracks, turned, looked at me, and then started walking home. I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's it.
Dogs know.
Yeah, not worth it. Not worth it, she said.
Yeah.
But what is worth it? What is worth sitting down and listening to this episode tonight is the amazing interview we have to share with you. We have the writers of the recently concluded Star Trek Con audio series, and also, of course, the writers of many, many other things throughout the Star Trek universe. Yeah. We have Kirsten Beyer and David Mack joining us. I'm thrilled. I love these two. They're always great fun to talk to. And it's always just a special thing to be able to have folks of their caliber on this podcast.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I record this podcast with the full expectation that it's only Dan and me listening in a lot of ways. I know we have a listenership, and I know, Dan, you've got a lot of really amazing connections. So to have this opportunity myself, to talk to the writers of what I would consider to be some of the best Trek recently, and a really satisfying and interesting new medium that we're boldly going into, is something that I am just I'm thrilled to be able to get a chance to talk to these two wonderful human beings. So I'm hoping that everyone listening and watching enjoys this as much as Dan and I are enjoying it.
Absolutely. Well, let's not keep them waiting. Let's welcome to the show Kirsten and David. So joining us today are the amazing writers of the recently concluded Star Trek Con audio drama, as well as numerous novels, as well as episodes in the Star Trek pantheon of stories. We have Kirsten Beyer and David Mack. Kirsten and David, welcome back to Positively Trek.
Good to be back.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have you because, we just finished. We did an episode for every couple episodes of Star Trek Con. We went through the whole series and enjoyed the heck out of it. And we really want to talk to you about it. So I guess we'll launch right into it here with the beginning of Star Trek Con. So 2018, that's 6 years ago now. We've got the announcement that this was going to be happening from Nicholas Meyer. How did we get from there to where we are today? What happened? And how did it arrive in its final form?
Well, between 2018 and 2023, I can't tell you a lot because I wasn't there. I know that Nick originally produced a couple of, 3 scripts for a potential series. I know that at some point it was decided, no, we're going to do it as an audio series instead, and that was announced at a Star Trek Day. And then I know Nick got to work with the nice people at Realm and all the studio folks, and they wrote 9 scripts, and then it was in October of 2023 when Alex called me and said, I need you to take a look at these, and I want you to work with Nick on them. And it was like, oh, okay. And I knew Nick, of course, because we had worked together in the first season of Discovery in that writer's room. So I already adored him. And so, I took a look at it. I called David right away because there were, what was clear from the outset is that we had the basics for a story that Nick very much wanted to tell, but there were lots of canon issues and lots of sort of like math and science kind of things, just because Nick is less familiar with the 900 hours of Star Trek that exist than David and I are. So we took it from there. I spent several months with Nick every morning talking through the things that mattered to him, the story he was trying to tell, really sort of trying to dig out the most important pieces of that. And then David and I worked together to figure out all the stuff around that needed to be there and that was going to make sense for the Star Trek audiences. And then David was kind enough to write the first pass of each episode, and then I took it from there through the rewrites, and then all the studio notes, and then all the post rewrites, and all of the things. So David got off easy, is what I'm trying to say.
I volunteered to do more. You didn't let me.
It was totally my fault. I'm that girl. Yeah.
Well, our recent interview with you, David Mack, you let us know that, Kirsten, you actually thrive on rewrites, which is...
I do.
That's got to be valuable because I hear that's a bit of a thankless job for some people.
I don't see it that way anymore. The reality of writing collaborative stuff and writing television, period, is that there are going to be dozens. You're lucky if it's less than that. Not necessarily at the outset. At the outset, you'll probably do 5 or 6 before you get it into some kind of form. And then the rewrites are just going to continue up until the day through post, right? You have what you agree to shoot, and then you realize what else you needed. And a lot of times that's ADR stuff or like whatever, but it does not stop until it's airing. Mm-hmm. So I never think of it as I'm going to be I'm going to write this one episode and I'm going to be done with that. It's just, it doesn't. Yeah, I have to enjoy it because it is what I do all the time.
More of an evolving process. Like, I forget who said it, but the projects are never finished; they're only abandoned. Kind of that mindset.
Yeah, I was going to say
Exactly.
you run out of either energy, interest, or time. But in the case of writing copy for a show, you run out of time. Energy and interest have to keep going.
100%.
Well, I guess I'm interested in kind of the process of writing this because, as we mentioned, both of you have written numerous Star Trek novels, and both of you also have experience writing for the various television shows as well. How did this experience what were the similarities and what were the differences between those processes, I guess?
Similarities are that they all have dialogue.
Fair.
Yeah.
That's about it.
And in terms of David and I working together, I mean, David and I have known each other for a very long time, and we've collaborated in a lot of different ways on a lot of different projects. And just sitting down and talking story with him is one of my favorite things.
It's a blast working with Kirsten too. Although I have to think a little bit faster than I normally do.
So using the radio medium, was there any other shows or genres or anything that you both drew from in that creation process at all? Any other radio shows or anything? Or, I mean, there's not a lot to pick from.
Yeah, I don't have a deep background in radio dramas. I had done one other audio drama like this before. A couple of years ago, I did one for Simon & Schuster for Picard called No Man's Land. So I felt really comfortable with having gone through this once before, with kind of knowing what some of the pitfalls were going to be, what some of the challenges were going to be, but you keep ironing that out as you go, right? First, you kind of have to get the thing in a shape and a form, and then you start trying to make it really pretty.
Yeah, I had some previous experience with audio drama working with Marco Palmieri at Realm, which, as it turns out, is the company that handled the actual hands-on audio production of Khan. And I worked on a couple of different series that ended up not being produced, but I was in like a writer's room situation that was run by Jeff Thorne for a project that he worked on, but eventually that just didn't come together. And then I developed a couple of other projects working with Marco that, again, for various reasons, got to the edge of development and then stopped. But they were valuable learning experiences in that I had a chance to learn about writing for the audio format. I had a chance to learn the script format, to talk to their production people about what does and doesn't work in terms of audio transitions, establishing a sonic environment, that sort of thing. And just learning to think in audio and not in video.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating. a long time ago got to work at a historical museum where I represented people from the 1920s, and I listened to some radio plays, and I always liked when they would be like, "Why are you picking up that gun?" Because
You're right.
you can't see what they're doing, that sort of stuff. So I've thought about that,
Well, that tradition actually goes all the way back to early stagecraft, Aristotle, Socrates, Shakespeare, where the characters have to set the stage in dialogue because they were limited to the audience's imagination. They had to fill in a lot of things. So they would narrate the scene even as they're in it. What a glorious morning. Can smell that pine in the forest around us? Isn't it glorious? You're setting the stage because you can't afford to build all that. So you drop it into scene narration and let the audience populate the world in their head.
Well, and especially with something like Star Trek too, like it's not going to be something that's innate to an audience's understanding. Like you have to present them not only with, the characters, but an alien world that they've never seen before, and all that's got to be an extra challenge as well.
I mean, actually the harder thing in some ways is to make it alien, I think, because we start walking through a forest and, there's trees and plants and stuff, and people are going to start picturing stuff that we have here on Earth. So the task, like through that part, was actually what are the ways that I can, hopefully in an interesting way, point out that it's not Earth exactly, that it is different. We are on an alien.
Another question I had was, so you've done the writing, you've written the scripts. Beyond that, you talked a bit about like everything continues right up to the very end. What was that collaboration like? Like, did you work with Fred Greenhalgh a lot? Did you work with the actors at all? Was that something that there was a genuine collaboration with everybody?
100%. Yeah. It became sort of Fred and I, and then all the studio shareholders who all had an interest in this. So once the scripts were ready to record, I was part of all the casting, and then Fred and I did all the recording sessions together. He was the director, so he did most of the interaction with the actors, but we got into a really great just sort of rhythm where, they would do a thing a few times and then they would go, "Kirsten, are you cool with that?" And I, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. And, could offer certain kinds of insights because I came from the world of acting. That's where I started all of this. So that was a lot of fun actually to hear it coming to life. And then Fred started working on the cuts, and he did all the coordination with the composers and the sound designers and those extraordinary people who did all of that. And then I would listen to the cuts along with everybody else, and we would all give notes. And then sometimes those notes involved adding new scenes or changing things within scenes. And then we re-recorded, and then it was September, and we collapsed, and the thing came out in the world.
Wow, that's incredible. Like, I think people see that credit, written by Kirsten Beyer and David Mack, story by Nicholas Meyer, and they don't understand. I certainly didn't understand what that all involved. That's incredible. That's really cool.
I was actually really curious if you were involved in casting in this, and if when you were writing, you might have had a voice actor in mind, or if it was serendipity. That would be an interesting story of how did you find your con, would be my big question for you.
With con specifically, it wasn't like people came to me like, "Kirsten, who do you want for con?" There were, everybody wanted to get the most amazing con possible. There were lots of conversations about who, not necessarily who specifically, but what kind of actor that we wanted. And, there's a handful that we talked with, and we're ultimately just overwhelmingly delighted when Naveen agreed to do it. It's that one, it's where you're asking nicely somebody that, is amazing if they're interested, and letting them read the scripts and all of that before they agree. With everybody else, it was auditions, and you would listen to, 20 people doing the same scene and decide where you wanted to go with that. Well, and Ren was also with Naveen. That was again a very, very small group of people, and we were just so happy to get Ren.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Ren Schmidt because I'm a huge fan of For All Mankind. I think she's incredible in that show, and I loved Lost and all of that. And Naveen Andrews, that was really cool to hear his name, and then they followed it up with Ren Schmidt, and I was like, what? That's awesome. speaking of Ren Schmidt, I guess her character of Marla McGivers is somebody who, in the original series, is kind of more of a plot driver than maybe a fully realized character in and of herself in a lot of ways. I'm interested in the process of the amazing things you did with that character and kind of bringing her to life and fully kind of realizing her a little bit and giving her maybe a voice that she didn't have in the 1960s.
It was sort of a mandate from the very beginning of when we came into work on the story that she was going to have to be more developed in every way possible than she had been in that episode. I mean, I think we see her in that episode for all of like 12 or 13 minutes. But I will say that my memory of her from the episode was very much like what you're talking about. Well, she was in love with him, and then she kind of betrayed her people, and then, she ends up going, And there were so many little things I had forgotten that when I went back and rewatched, I was like, no, she told him, don't ask me to hurt them. When he did that anyway in front of her, she went and she rescued the captain and, she saved him, knowing, I'm sure, that that's a court-martial and she's done. So, like, she had even more backbone and agency than I remembered. And then Ren, too, like, there were so many things in that performance that she said that she thought and found that she built from kind of like just merging the two of them together in her mind. And I just think it had to do with how much of this was, gosh, I fell in love with him the minute I saw him and that was it and it was over. And how much of it was, yeah, he's sexy and like whatever, but also it's like I'm a historian and a piece of history just walked in front of me. And now I can ask all the questions firsthand and like how intriguing was that to her? So in building, the point of all of this is we need to build a relationship dynamic between her and Khan that is exciting and interesting to the audience, right? If she's a doormat, nobody wants to see that story. But she also can't be somebody that we've never, that absolutely makes no sense with what we saw in Space Seed. So you have to find a way to sort of like merge those two and ultimately come up with, the goal was someone who Khan could see as an equal for the first time in his life in that kind of a relationship dynamic. That's what we were shooting for. And I think that's what we got to.
Definitely. That was something that just, I really, really enjoyed about the series was both the writing of her character and the performance for sure. And in fact, I remembered, I can't remember which episode, but when you basically kind of call out the one really assertive thing she did in Space Seed, and Khan refers to that as her first betrayal, right? And she has to come back and correct him on that. And I loved that whole scene. That was amazing.
I think that was in the second episode in Scheherazade, yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate the way you had MacGyver's sort of act as a foil to Khan's pride in a lot of ways. I appreciated that because in that she was also able to kind of dig in and see his love for his people, but also assuage his paranoia. And obviously, speaking of theater and theater of old, like Shakespeare and Greek plays and stuff, this is a tragedy, a horrible, horrible tragedy. And it's fun watching the train wreck and stuff like that. But was there any other options that you may have had on, and I guess spoiler alert, on losing MacGyver's, on her death? I find it interesting the way in which you chose to lose her, because I think it puts a lot more on Khan, and I feel like you took the story in a direction I wasn't really expecting. I appreciate that a lot about this specific way in which you put it together. But yeah, to the point basically is, how did you kind of balance the loss of MacGyver's and make Khan have to also be a father at the same time? Like, was there any other options you had been considering on how to kind of end things and make his, when he loses his wife in Wrath of Khan kind of thing, or when he mentions it?
Yeah, I think, David, didn't we in the earliest drafts have Marla actually die by around episode 5? Like,
I think we originally had her dying at like the midpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that happened as I was doing the revisions was there was actually a lot of restructuring that became necessary through the second half of this piece, because one of the things that was clear was that amongst all the other stories, this was really like Marla and Khan's love story, right?
Mhm.
And if she's going to go in 5, you've got to peak her at like 3. And there was literally no way to do that with the amount of other story that we had to cover. So as is sort of like coming into shape, her death keeps getting pushed further and further and further out until we are at the end of episode 7. And it's like, yeah, we can't actually lose her any earlier than that.
It made sense, though. It made sense because you want a tragedy like that to be your Act 2 closer.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And we know that the top of 8, we're jumping 5 years in the future, so we're done. Like, but we very much also wanted to keep her alive, as it were, through those logs, through 8 and 9, because her presence was so important and so powerful throughout the whole thing. I never really wanted her to not be there. But in terms of how she was going to die, yeah, we actually had 2 or 3 other earlier versions when we talked about like maybe some, there were earlier versions, and when David and I were first looking at this, and just like separate from Nick, how would we do this? It was a lot darker than where we ended up. But one of the things that we had talked about was a version of Marla where she was in love with him, but also once she got there and was sort of like under his rule, was never going to be comfortable with that. And ultimately, betrayed him, turned away from him in some way. But by that point in time, she was sort of his property and he saw it that way. And so he would he was the one who maybe gave her the eel in order to force her to continue to be loyal to him and stay with him. And then that ultimately kills her, right? So like we talked about those kinds of things.
There were moments you were suggesting story ideas that were so dark that she would pitch it, and I'd be like, "What? Are you out of your mind? How could you even think of this? Where did that come from?" She horrified me.
Wow.
just see if I can. Like, it's fun to do that to people, right? It's just a story. But the more the things started to really come into shape, and the moments, the early moments between Khan and Marla came together and really began to exist. It was like, no, this really is. They love each other, and they are completely mismatched in a lot of ways from 2 different times and 2 different worlds. So how are we going to take the very thin thread that's binding them and keep making it stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger while still maintaining the integrity of each of them, right? So that was the balancing act and the trick of it.
There was a tenderness in the tragedy, I guess, the way it kind of finished off. And just as a question, and I mean, Kirsten, you're no stranger to dealing with, gigantic characters in between. Like I'm thinking Unification 3, having to write around a character with that much gravitas, and one false move, right? And saying that Nick didn't quite have all of those pieces together. That's why the both of you were brought in. How did you balance telling this new compelling story while kind of respecting these narrative constraints? I always think of Star Trek writers as having to walk these tightropes of stuff. And maybe you've answered this question before with Dan, but for myself, like I was thinking to myself, like maybe this one could have been a little easier because he had so much time on SETI Alpha 5, but at the same time, there is sometimes you could get so creative, you might miss something, you might get outside of that. Was there a rule about what you could or couldn't change about Khan's journey at all, or was this kind of more of a go for it sort of feel?
Well, it definitely wasn't go for it. It was because once, like I said, David and I sort of like did a version after we had seen Nick's version, and when both of those were laid out in front of the executives, they were like, we like pieces of this and we like pieces of that. So that was when Nick and I sat down and started to go through it. And those were sort of like, I guess I didn't feel like, not that I wasn't free to do whatever I wanted to. Like if I felt really strongly about something, like personally, I felt incredibly strongly about the framing story. I thought that the story needed that to connect it and give it the feel of the fact that this augment issue has sort of like existed within Trek, not just from the beginning with Khan, but it has rippled out all the way through into the present day. Right? Like we're still wrestling with how we're going to handle that this thing even ever happened, right? And I wanted there to be people from beyond that moment in time who could look back on it and go, even with the limited perspective, because it's only been about a decade, like, what does this mean for us now? Like, how does this affect us as a society? Like, somebody who was sort of more in a present situation as opposed to in the thick of it, right? But that wasn't part of Nick's original story at all. But the child that he and Marla had very much was. So it was like chocolate and peanut butter, kind of like all the way through. So like I sort of could change whatever I wanted to, but I thought the job was to tell the best version possible of what Nick was trying to do. So that process was so much just about understanding like what was important to him. You know, he had this whole George Washington, Benedict Arnold thing going on with Ivan and Khan. Like that was a deeply important relationship to him.
Yeah.
And he really, the whole refugee immigrant story that the Delmonda and the Alborians sort of became was super important to him. And then Khan's redemption right before the fall was always his end goal. That he actually was, through this experience, going to be turned into a better person. And then it was sort of my job to go like, well, sure, we will get there, but we still have to then get to Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, that to me was that moment where you see the Khan that could be, right? Like
the Khan that could be.
Yeah, the potential in front of him. And I think when we talked about it, for whatever reason, what was going through my head was Q talking to Picard at the end of All Good Things, saying like, for one brief instant, you were open to possibilities that had never occurred to you before. And I felt like those synapses were building in Khan's brain. And then of course, just the tragedy of the sequence of events that just leads him to just be smashed right back down into the muck of SETI Alpha 5, I guess. Just so tragic, like tragedy upon tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
You've done, you wrote the story for It's Only a Paper Moon, if I recall. And
with John Ordover. Yeah.
Right. Yes. That song actually got me into Jimmy Darren's music. That episode did. I was like, I liked his version of Paper Moon ever since. But kind of writing the trauma-informed character. You and Kirsten, when you put together Khan, watching him now in Wrath of Khan, I kind of see him more as this trauma-informed character. And maybe that wasn't necessarily. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but like. Is there a through line in writing that kind of like damage of a character or damaging a character to kind of give that new perspective on them? I think, it built Nog up quite a bit back in the day. Seeing the Khan that could have been and realizing that it was traumatic events that brought him back down again. I don't know where I'm going with the question on this other than like, was there any connective tissue there at all?
I mean, the process of building the character up to tear him down served two very different narrative functions in the stories that you've mentioned. In the case of Paper Moon, Nog's injury in combat and then his post-traumatic stress disorder is a growth experience for him. It means he has to take a step back in order to take that second step forward. But he has to confront, as all of us do at some point, the fact that we are not invulnerable, we are not invincible, and we are not immortal. When you're young, you think you're all of these things. And then at some point, for all of us, at some point, something happens in life. You get old, you get that first major injury, something happens or some other tragedy in your life happens that wakes you up and makes you realize, yeah, I'm just as mortal as everybody else. And having to accept that truth is a cognitive dissonance moment, and you have to push through it in order to achieve real adulthood, to achieve maturity, and it's a major step on the road to wisdom. In the case of Khan, the breakage is even more tragic in that it is not about growth, but it's simply a tragic loss. He had an opportunity for greatness. He was given an opportunity by Kirk. He was given this world and a chance to show the leader he could be in a world where nobody is opposing him, where there is no war, where there are only his followers, his friends, his brothers in arms who are willing to follow him into any challenge. What kind of a world could he have built where he wasn't asked to fight a war at the same time? What could he have done? And he was on the verge of greatness, and just a series of stupid cosmic tragedies beyond his control knock him down. And that's what really sucks, is that it took away the paradise that he was supposed to build into a new world. It took away the woman who gave his life meaning and balance, gave him an external perspective on himself that he needed in order to grow. Taking that away from him broke him on a certain level, but he still had at least the daughter. He had Kali. He had a focus of meaning that was outside of himself, which is that crucial thing that he was missing before Space Seed. His sense of gravity was always internal. The moment he was connected to Marla and then in turn Kali, his focus became external. And the moment of tragedy in the end of Khan, when he thinks he has lost Kali, that is the moment when he's lost everything. Every chance at improvement, every chance at becoming a better version of himself, everything that was guiding him, every pole star, every touchstone that was going to guide him on the road to being better is summarily taken away. It's as if the cosmos just didn't want it for him, or as if there was some karmic justice that had to be paid for what he did on Earth. Or maybe it was just shit luck. I think it's just shit luck. It's just, that's what makes the story, is shit falls on your head. What do you do? And in this case, he reverted to the only mode he understood, which was fight, kill, conquer, defeat. He couldn't see compromise. He couldn't see friendship. I mean, his first reaction when he sees the Alborians is, we got to wipe them out before they wipe us out. It's like, could you maybe say hello first? Say hi, shake hands, then kill them. But, see how that goes. No, his first thought, kill. So he's got this hamartic flaw that he's just never going to overcome. And the only thing that stands between him and that hamartic flaw is the external focus of Marla and then Kali. And when those are lost, he's lost.
Actually, since you brought up the Alborians as well, I'd love to talk a little bit about them. From the sounds of what you were saying before, they were a part of Nick Meyer's original story for the show.
So as an example of like how we had to massage sort of things, right? In his version, they were natives of Ceti Alpha 6.
Oh,
and
Ceti
Alpha 6 was a spacefaring, had starships. And they at one point came over. And I looked at that and I'm like, okay, except when the Enterprise shows up and scans the system, looking for a planet to leave Khan on, if the planet next door has a spacefaring race on it, there is no frickin' way you leave the space Nazis on Ceti Alpha 5. Like, just too big of a risk, right?
And why would the Reliant even have it as a candidate for a lifeless planet, right?
Right. Yeah. So David and I actually went completely the other direction, and we came up with a species that was native to Ceti Alpha 5, but wouldn't necessarily read to Enterprise's sensors as part of an intelligent civilization. We were like, some version of octopuses, basically, that were super intelligent and telepathic, and like you could have meaningful conversation with, but that they weren't from another planet. And Nick just really held his ground and was like, no, I really want the refugee part of this. And more important, he really wanted, like, for him, Delmonda was this Christ-like figure, which I was like, okay, those are hard to write because they don't tend to present a lot of obstacles. So you have to, we had to really feel our way through that. So the sort of the uneasy compromise is, okay, they're from another place, but they are the ones responsible for the destruction of Ceti Alpha. To give them a motivation for the absolute extraordinary lengths that they go to try to help Khan and his people, which I think anybody, no matter how Christ-like, would have given up long before Delmonda did, if it had not been for that guilt that he was carrying, that this was actually all his fault, and he knew it.
Yeah. Although the one thing that worked out really well with this, insistence by Nick that we have this other refugee group is that you see that they are essentially very much like the Augments. You have another group that has become exiled from its home world because it is philosophically incompatible with the people it lived with. In case of the augments, they were incompatible with the changing culture on Earth. The Alborian group that comes to SETI Alpha 5 is incompatible with the folks on their homeworld for various reasons. Maybe the opposite reason, they were too altruistic, cons people not enough. But you essentially have two groups of outcasts who have both become marooned on the same planet. You have two completely contradictory philosophical and ethical structures that are really never going to mesh, but somebody has to give on some point. And the Alborians wind up giving everything, and the augments wind up really giving next to nothing. But in a way, that's also part of the moral of the story. And it's interesting to have that juxtaposition, but also those parallels of two groups of exiles in one paradise.
We don't go into a lot of detail about what all of the augment Alborian relations were like, but I do think with the inclusion of like Paulo and Kimura, and we had talked about too, that especially amongst the younger people, it made a lot of sense that they would start to mingle. They would form like normal friendships and relationships and romances and all of those things, and that would be the generation sort of leading the way for the older ones who may have found it harder, especially on the augment side, to connect with the new people just because of the lack of trust. You know, the problem with these guys is they never watched Star Trek, right? They didn't know that when you meet a new species, it's absolutely fine to go, oh, hey, what are you guys about? Right? All they had being born in the late 20th century in Earth, you know, Earth's 20th century was, you know, it's us or them.
I'm so glad you brought up Paulo and Kimura because pour one out for Paulo. I remember when we got to that episode and I found out that he had been killed, essentially off screen. I was like, I was kind of losing my mind about that. But then over the course of the episode, you kind of realize that how much of an influence he's had and the influence certainly on Ursula and her actions, really informed that and completely changed the outcome of everything. And I was like, okay, all right. Vindication for Paulo. I love that guy.
And that was always in there. But maybe the thing that would interest you to know is that in the original script, Paulo died at the end of 8, not at the beginning of 9. The end of 8 was actually Paulo's final story, right? So we understand he's set up to be, you know, one of the guys who's going on the ship. He has the disappointment of learning that that's not what's going to happen. He's beside himself now. He's being forced to help Ursula get the camp set up for everybody else who's coming up the next day, you know, and they have this argument where you finally see Paulo kind of fulfilled, right? He has stepped into all of the things that we've gotten hints of before about who this guy could be. He has stepped into it and he's like, no, this is wrong and I hate it. And, you know, I understand that he's con and there's nothing we can do about it, but this is, you know, awful and I'm going to be mad about it for a really long time. You know, and the last thing he says before he walks out the door is, I hate this place. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
he literally dies mad about it.
Yeah, he does. And then there was the scene where, you know, Ursula's talking to Ado, and then we hear somebody coming in, and she's like, I gotta go. I think it's Paulo coming back, right? And Ivan came in, and he dragged Paulo's body in, and you were like, oh my God, right? So that was how I wrote it. And then in the post-production process, the challenge was we were picking up at the top of episode 9 with Ursula talking to Ivan. And once the Paulo reveal had happened, it was very hard to get your bearings at the beginning of that scene, from that point in the scene on, about what was really going on between the two of them. So the editorial decision was made to just take the end of 8 to Ivan's entrance, and then pick up and do the rest of the scene at the top of 9. So that's the trade-off. Mm-hmm. You do have this weird gut punch of, wait, we just killed Paulo? And as opposed to it feeling like the denouement of what the story had been building to the whole time, right? But what you don't have is any confusion as you continue through 9 about where the pieces are on the board and you know, and all of that. So it's just one of those weird things that happens.
That makes a ton of sense. And actually, I feel like that almost the confusion around Ursula's story, I think it gets really reinforced by that at the top of the episode. So I think that was probably a good choice. And in retrospect, I'm like, okay, all right, fine. And like I said, I
felt
did
the same way.
Yeah. And like I said, though, I came around because, it was because of Paolo and that everything kind of happened the way it happened. So I liked that for kind of a tribute to his character, I guess. As always, Positively Trek is brought to you by its Patreon supporters, including Joyce Mirren, Brandy Jacala, Christina DeClercq-Zalagi, John Guppy, Out of Memory, Patrick Carlin, and Ricky Long. If you'd like to support the podcast, visit patreon.com/positivelytrek. You can join at any level and enjoy early access to episodes, ad-free episodes, episode shoutouts, executive producer credits, and more. Again, that's patreon.com/positivelytrek. Thank you so much to those of you supporting us. We truly do appreciate it. And now, back to the show. But another character I think we should talk about is Ivan, because he was a character that engendered very strong feelings from the very beginning. And Barry, I know for sure you had some very strong feelings about him towards the end as well.
You guys made a character I love to hate, and that's always good. I mean, you can make good characters like I do. Like I'm interested in sort of your characterization of a lot of these characters because they had a uniqueness to them that was very strong. It was a good ensemble, I guess you could say. And like, what is a Star Trek show without its ensemble, right? And so, where did the vision of Paolo come from? But actually, yeah, what Dan is saying, how did you make such a hateable character like Ivan? What kind of ingredients, like Eye of Newt? What are we at here? What do we get? How do we make an Ivan?
First, you take away empathy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All empathy.
And true evil.
To strip empathy, and build from there.
Honestly, in our early discussions about Ivan, because there was another piece of Ivan's story that is really kind of, it may seem heavy-handed with the potatoes and the vodka and then the eels, but because those were the only three places that we could really sort of hit it. But for a long time, we were talking about a much deeper sort of addiction story with Ivan. Ivan, to me, was always this guy who, raised in a lab, born to be a great soldier. He's the one that Khan sends to conquer Russia, and he kicks ass at it, and he sort of like falls in love with the place. But he's also going to be dealing constantly with the trauma of the things that he has done and self-medicating in order to deal with that. And then he gets to Ceti Alpha, goes to sleep on Earth, wakes up on Ceti Alpha 5, and there's none of that available to him. So he's going to go into withdrawal, and he's going to sort of have to refigure out like his life from the go. And almost from the beginning, that's one of the things he was really struggling with. And one of the things that was making it hard for him to find his way to any kind of light. So that was kind of where we were starting. And then for Nick, it was this Benedict Arnold, George Washington thing. Khan and Ivan, either one of them could have ended up as the supreme leader of those people. There were just going to be a certain kinds of characteristics, a little bit more in one, a little bit less in the other, that made all the difference, because that's the way he saw those two. And ultimately, going that much deeper into Ivan's story just sort of became untenable, given just the volume of story that we had to tell in the 9 episodes that we had. So he had to get sort of scaled back and simplified. And for me, the sort of like clear through line, because David did a lot of writing of his voice that was, that's what you love about it, For me, he sort of became the guy that everybody thought Khan was when this thing started. Like, if you thought you knew Khan, that's how you thought he was going to behave. And it was sort of delightful to have Khan continuing to frustrate those expectations by being, somehow deeper and smarter and more empathetic and actually able to love and gentle with the people, whatever, as you've got this other thing standing there.
Yeah, everyone figured Khan was going to be Caligula, but Marla, once they get to Ceti Alpha 5, Marla says, or you could be King Arthur. Which do you want to be?
Yeah.
Problem is, he's King Arthur living with Caligula.
With his best friend, Caligula. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a Lancelot who doesn't want to screw his wife; he wants to kill her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, that's a great sitcom, King Arthur and Caligula. What kind of wacky hijinks would they get into?
All right. I guess I'll go write that one now.
Yeah.
I would watch that. Weirdly enough.
Cal and Arthur.
Just generally, the kind of cast of characters that we have here are a bunch of people that I hadn't thought of. This, I mean, I'm not a writer, and there's many reasons why that is, but Marla would say it's a lack of imagination. I hadn't thought of, the other people that are there with Khan. They announce a Khan series on SETI Alpha 5. I'm thinking Khan, Marla MacGyvers. Cool, what happens to them? Populating this world with all the incidentals like Ursula and Mado and all of these people. I'd love to hear a little bit about what went into each of them and kind of how you fleshed out the non-speaking roles that maybe you see in the background of Space Seed and Wrath of Khan.
Initially, some of it came down to what are the kind of specialists we need, right?
And then one of my first thoughts was we have Joaquin in Space Seed as the right-hand guy to Khan, or at least one of them. And then we have Joachim in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. Very similar name, but a much younger man, which doesn't really seem to make sense given the time frame. So we eventually put it together. We said, all right, well, some of these augments maybe are younger than others. Maybe some of them are only in their teens that Khan has rescued. He's trying to rescue a future generation. What if Joachim is the son of Joaquin? What if they are related and the name is a tribute? And so we sort of, found that little relation that gives us something to build on. And then we said we need to populate specialists. And then we said, but we also need them to be distinct. So at least in my first pass scripts, the first idea for Ursula was, yes, she's a doctor, but she's not warm and cuddly with a great bedside manner. She's cold and German and sort of, a little bit mean, a little bit harsh, a little bit curt. She's not the doctor you want, but she's the one you got. And then you have Mado, who's more of, the scientist, the farmer, the agricultural specialist, but basically their top science officer. And I pictured her as being French in origin. We had a couple of other characters, minor characters, who we just had to let go of. But we had somebody like Otto. We had another guy. We had names drawn from various cultures around Earth to try and create a feeling of multicultural Superman, just to sort of mix it up. But in the end, we just had to come down to focus on the handful really at the core, which was you have the Ivan and Khan thing, and you got Marla. Then you have Mado and Ursula as a couple with their fertility issues, which gives us that whole arc. And then we simply have all the other supernumeraries, but then we have the kids. We have the teens who are trying to navigate adolescence as well as exile. Again, gives us another perspective on life on SETI Alpha 5.
It was pleasantly surprising to me how much I ended up caring about a lot of these characters. Like, I found myself, wondering what happened in the intervening years to Ursula, Mado and Khan's daughter off in the galaxy. Like, what was that like, raising her and stuff? So credit to both of you for sure for really giving those characters life. And then, of course, the incredible voice actors as well did a great job with them.
Yeah, they were amazing.
I could see writing a book about Kali, to be honest. Not that I think there's a market for it, but I could see doing it.
Yeah.
I'd read it.
Absolutely. I'd be right there for sure.
It's an interesting challenge, too.
Yeah. Maybe that's something that I kind of want to talk about, and maybe it's a little meta. Dan and myself as podcasters, the two of you as, writers and contributors to the Star Trek genre, we're sort of speaking directly to an audience here. What do you hope this format offers the longtime Trek fan that might be different from a new novel or comic or episode?
Do you think that the audio experience is unique as an art form? Because you have this drama playing out, but it is only happening in your head and your ears, right? It's somehow slightly more than what happens when you read, a little bit more work than when you read a novel, because depending on what the author does, they can, in very long descriptive passages, tell you exactly what you're looking at or whatever. But there's an immediacy in the drama because of the performances of the actors that those kind of forms sort of lack. But it's also, what I like is that you actually have to engage your brain a little bit more than you have to when you're watching something. It's very easy to sit back and just kind of let that wash over you. But if you're going to be into this, you're going to have to be listening and paying attention. It's very hard to do anything else, maybe other than driving while listening to this. If you're doing other chores and like making notes and whatever, you're going to lose story because it's all happening in the words, right? And I just think that's a cool experience. And also for better and worse, it allows us to play with words in a way we don't necessarily get to when we're writing for the screen. There's a lot of impatience around too many words when it's a visual medium. And this is one where I felt my author getting to indulge in the kinds of ways of thinking and expressing that had to be so specific in the words, because that's all you have.
Yeah, I think there was a poetry to your dialogue in the various final drafts that is sometimes discouraged in TV just because, it's a visual medium. And I sometimes feel like they're afraid of words, but here you had the last word, basically. You had the freedom to indulge yourself in some poetry, some grandiloquence in your choice, especially for characters like Khan and Kali, but you also knew when to dial it back and to embrace that sort of terse style of Tuvok or the slightly, world-weary, Captain Sulu. You found the voices perfectly, but you also had a freedom to just give them a little bit more poetry, a little more poetic license, and to find that beauty in the language that sometimes TV just doesn't have time for.
TV doesn't always have time for Coleridge either. And I'm glad you guys laced that in.
Yeah. Well, I think some of that too comes from the character of Khan as created originally in Space Seed as well, and certainly as developed by Nick in Wrath of Khan, right? He always had that kind of flavor to him. He obviously had read all the books, knew all of the books by heart, every piece of classic literature that there was, he knew and had at his disposal for reference. And it's so interesting because even with all of that, he is still at this very weird disadvantage because we all know how critical the next 200 years of history are for us and how we changed and developed and evolved so far beyond him, where we can still appreciate that stuff, but he can't even grasp what it was that we became.
David, you mentioned Tuvok, which reminded me I wanted to talk to you, Kirsten, about the character of Tuvok, because this is a character that, once I kind of made the connection in my head, wait a minute, Kirsten Beyer's writing this. This is a Voyager character. We're going to get some character development of Tuvok here. What was it like kind of taking that character at this point in his life? We know he's very shortly going to become jaded with Starfleet and leave for 80 years. And I don't know, what kind of touchstones did you bring to that character for this story?
The Voyager characters, all of those guys lived in my head for 20 years constantly. No. So if you're asking me to write any of them, they're all just there for me, right? So it's just a matter of what is the circumstance that we now find ourselves in, right? And for me too, Tuvok, Tim Russ's performance of that character is one of the most astonishing things the more times you rewatch that show. I think the first few times, a lot of it sort of goes over your head because there's all these bells and whistles. But he is quietly and subtly doing this extraordinary work all the time on that show. And so it's fun to try to do that justice, right? To try to meet that level of subtlety there, knowing that if you can write it, he can give it to you in spades. So yes, he's younger. Yes, he is much less experienced, which means he's going to be a little bit more deferential initially to his captain, and he's going to be a little bit more by the book with Lear initially. But what's so lovely is the way this adventure gets to start to break him a little bit, right? Like he, against his will, is intrigued by this historian who's not really behaving like a historian, and keeps saying all the right things, but then she wants me to break into classified records for it. Like, what's happening here? But at the same time being able to look at his captain and go, yeah, I get it, he hurt you, but not the point right now, sir. So like, it was just a delightful journey to take him on. But in terms of like finding him throughout, that is just like an instinct for me at this point with all of those characters.
I will say the way that you used Tim Russ's voice when you wrote the line where he basically just calls Lear a liar to her face in that roundabout Vulcan way. Oh, that was beautiful.
Yeah. Most of this is likely a lie. Yeah. Yeah. And he was like, one take Tim, like you'd hear it and go, yeah, that's Tuvok. Well, let's keep going. He just instantly goes to it as well. It's just, it's delightful serendipity that he happened to be the character who we have from canon, who was with Sulu at that time. I mean, it just, the minute we sort of saw it, it was like, oh, well, yeah, that's what you have to do then. Right?
I'm so glad he was able to come back to, and of course, George Takei. I mean, yeah, that's great. Possibly, I knock on wood, I hope not, but, possibly the last time we'll have George Takei in a Star Trek production, right? So,
yeah, maybe.
Pretty incredible, for sure.
And he was delightful.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. So you got to work with him as well during the process?
Yeah, I was there for his recording sessions. And, the thing that was lovely, like, I had done all this stuff with Tuvok and sound. Like, he liked to listen to, there was this whole thing that got cut about how the engines of the original Enterprise sounded. They actually, like, had a frequency that they resonated at that was subliminally comforting to everybody on the, like, reduced stress among the crew. But the newer strips don't have that. And so the micrometeors and the music and all these things, he's constantly trying to sort of compensate for this thing that he used to have when he was in space that he doesn't have anymore. And I was doing the thing where you're like, it's, this Song of the Stars or like whatever, like just knowing that the musicians and the composer are going to make something lovely there for me. But George comes in and he's like, well, I think he'd be listening to Furley's. And I think this music should be that and this. And I'm like, awesome. Go. Done. So he was very collaborative too in his own way. Because he obviously owns that character completely. And we're just borrowing it and grateful to do so.
Well, one thing we made, this was an actual policy that we made when we started talking about Star Trek Con with episode 1. Before we started recording, I said we are not going to say the word canon at any point during our review of any of this. However, it did come out a little while ago, the interview you did, that basically, I guess this will be, as canon as anything can be going forward. That's pretty cool. I think that's neat. I'm speaking as someone whose philosophy is the only people who should be worried about canon are the people that write Star Trek and not the people who consume Star Trek. But still, very cool.
Because that was like one of the first questions we got out of the gate as soon as it came out. I was like, is it canon? I'm like, does it matter? Like, I didn't care particularly, but then I kept getting asked so many times, I kind of had to, go to people and be like, is it? Are we going to, just, yes, we will. We will not contradict. We will not overwrite. I mean, you never know. It's a dangerous job. You know that going in. But yeah, that is the intention of it. I think for me, it's just always been very easy to be like, if it's on film, right? And then we got animated series, we got shorts, we got all those things. And everything else, which there's so much great storytelling in the novels, in the comics, in the games. Like, there's people do amazing stuff in this universe. And whether it's canon or not has never limited my ability to enjoy any of it, So, but for some people, it really is a hang-up.
Yeah.
I'm sad.
Absolutely. Yeah. And here on not letting that destroy any enjoyment. I mean, The Final Reflection is one of my all-time favorite novels, which just, if you take into account canon, it just cannot have happened. But I don't care. It's such a great book.
When we built the sarcophagus ship in Discovery Season 1, I sat down with the set designer and took out a number of those phrases. All things done beneath the naked stars are remembered. There were a few other sections like that they literally carved into the stairs in Klingon. They translated it into Klingon and carved those words there. That was when we walked into the room on day 1 of Discovery. Brian Fuller handed a copy of that book to all of us. I, of course, already read it many times, but he's like, "Y'all need to look at this. This is how far we can go. Don't be limited by anything you think you know about Klingons."
Nice. Yeah, as soon as I think it was Tukuvma said the Black Fleet, I was like, oh, okay.
oh, that's where we are. Oh, yes, indeed.
Very cool.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
I was going to ask, just in regards to that, and yeah, as a person who just really likes Star Trek, and I don't really fall into the world of canon, like I've you kind of the crew. You're right, like for you, Kirsten, obviously, like the crew of the Voyager did live in your head for such a long time because they had to. But like, they live in my head. They live in all of our heads, and we do make our own little decisions and stuff like that, but on their life. But where would I say, like, or where would I ask, like, in terms of like the audio medium or, similar to that, what would you say, like, would there be any other corners of the Star Trek universe that you think would be well suited to this medium? Like, I don't know, the adventures of Captain Sulu, for instance. Like, I was thinking, like, George Takei, obviously might be a little more limited now, but we've reimagined characters. Obviously looking at, moving on with Kali, and I don't want to step on any, like, writing in the future toes or anything like that at this point. But, yeah. What are our thoughts there? Like, any other places we'd want to go?
I think we're trying to keep our powder dry on that one. I think
Fair enough.
We have ideas that we have not pitched, and I don't think we want to spoil the water just yet.
Fair. But that's a good hint that this has potential.
Yeah, I do. The one thing I will say is that, for so long writing the books, yes, we got to take the story forward, but like, there is this feeling of guardrails, right? Things that are known, that are happening in other parts of the universe that are affecting ours, and like, whatever. And as much as I recognize the joy in filling in some of those gaps and making certain stories deeper and richer and more enjoyable, like, just the thing I am craving constantly right now is just the brand new.
Yeah.
I want to write stories about characters we have never seen before, because we have 1,000 years of history to play with, and very few of it that we have actually seen. And there's these big open blank spaces, and I want to start filling in some of those, not just with like our Starfleet characters, but with citizens of the Federation and the wider galaxy, right? I want to know everything about how everybody lives and how all of those things work. And play with all of that. So not anything specific in terms of story, but I just want to do new things.
Yeah. Create a new pantheon and in a lot of ways. And I think that is the refreshing outlook I think that we have with Star Trek right now is also finding new characters, getting new characters. I think Dan and I both said that, when Picard ended, we were kind of like, is this going to be a new series? Like those kinds of things that do kind of make me interested. Like, I'll always love Picard. I'll always love Kirk. I'll always love Janeway, all that stuff. But I can love new people. We can reimagine this. The genre itself, this franchise, is not limited to the recognizable. And I think maybe that's a bit of I don't know. It's a bit of a corner we've kind of painted ourselves into, like, pop culturally at this point. And I think the first group to branch away from that is good. And I mean, this audio format that we're talking about might not necessarily be the breakthrough. Maybe it's a little more niche, but it definitely scratched an itch for me quite a bit as a person who commutes a lot and all that sort of stuff. Actually, I think when Marla got tagged by that eel, I think I missed my highway turnoff when I was listening to it. I was like, oh, crap. I wasn't expecting her to die. Then it's just like, oh no, not now.
Wait,
She's in a hot tub. This shouldn't happen now. Yeah, no.
I thought maybe it would be a time machine, but not this.
Something else. Yeah.
But I mean, one thing to remember is that, at some point, all of these stories were new. All of these characters were unknowns at some point. There was a point at which Kirk was the new because they'd given up on the Pike pilot. At some point, Picard was the new. It was like, are we really going to follow a whole different crew that isn't Kirk? And then Deep Space Nine, we're really going to be on a space station instead of a ship.
Right.
Voyager, we're separated from all of the Star Trek races we know and all the politics, and we're out in a completely new section of the galaxy, and there's no other Starfleet. Really? And it's like, at every point, these were new, crazy, untested ideas that eventually the fans learned to love the characters, and they learned to love the stories, and they began to realize that it's not about any one iteration of Star Trek, that Star Trek is not just a fictional setting, but it's an ethos. It's an ideology. It's a way of thinking about the future in more inclusive terms. It's a way of seeing the universe with better eyes. And that's going to continue regardless of what setting you choose to tell Star Trek stories in, what era you choose to tell them in, whether you choose to tell them on a planet, on a ship, on a space station, whether you're telling them through civilians, academics, humans, aliens. It doesn't matter. In the end, what matters is the point of view, the belief that we're better off with friendship, we're better off with alliance and learning to live together and share. We're better off finding peaceful solutions rather than violent ones. It's about the beliefs. It's not even really about the tropes. It's not about the phasers and the ships. It's about, can we continue to improve ourselves and learn to see the good in others?
Brilliant. Love it. Absolutely. So really quickly, I know we're kind of on a time crunch here. I know we've said that, the future of audio productions depends on how this one does and all that sort of stuff. Do we know any of that yet? Anything that you can say or not?
Actually don't.
I know nothing.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, yeah, it's just, I no one has shared numbers with me yet.
Okay.
I am Sergeant Schultz. I know nothing. Nothing.
I mean, the one thing I can say is that everybody on the studio side has shared how happy they are with what we made and the way that people are responding to it and enjoying it. That much I do know.
Then again, these are the people who tell you failed the pitch session by saying, well told. So, you take the praise with a grain of salt.
Fair enough. Well, if I can add my voice to the chorus of people saying that they really enjoyed this and really hope to see more, I volunteer as tribute. Put me in that chorus for sure.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
So a couple minutes left. What do you both have on the go that our listeners would be interested in knowing about? Any future projects you can reveal at this time, or are there NDAs coming out the wazoo?
There are always NDAs coming out the wazoo. Probably too soon for me to say anything. I am working on some stuff, but nothing officially announced yet.
For me, it's everybody watch Starfleet Academy coming out in January, season 1. I'm in the midst of working on season 2 at the moment.
Ooh, that's exciting. Really looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah. The new stuff, and like I said, Kirsten, that is exactly what I'm excited for. Is let's get into some new territory. Just really quick, I have a deep respect for both of you and the work you've done, and this was an extremely refreshing medium. You've boldly gone where no Star Trek writers have gone as much before. So,
well, she went there before.
Yeah, but yeah, we were close. Second contact.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and
oh God,
I'm
the Cerritos.
Yeah, you are. And I would just like to say, the joy that I had listening to you guys talk about it and the perspectives that you brought to it, and your obvious passion for history and how you were bringing up all of these, it was so fascinating to listen to you guys engage with the material as well. So that was a gift you gave me that was fantastic, and I really appreciate it.
It means a lot. Thank you.
That does mean a lot. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, I see that we're about to turn into pumpkins. So, Kirsten and Dave, thank you so very much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I hope we can talk about another such project again soon.
We hope to have that opportunity.
Me too.
Thanks so much. Well, that was, of course, amazing. What was it like talking to a pair of Star Trek writers for the first time, Barry?
Not the word intimidating isn't correct, but I definitely felt like I'm like, okay, Barry, you got to be on here. There are points in time where like, hey, I'm just talking with Dan. We can kind of make speculation and all this sort of stuff, but definitely getting to talk with the people whose craft you and I have been talking about for many episodes here. I definitely found myself like thinking about what I had to say before I said it to make sure that I was a little more articulate, and getting to get into the how all this was made was just so incredibly interesting, and just the candor and just good nature of both David and Kirsten is just lovely, and I'd love to talk to them again sometime.
Oh, well, let's hope. I mean, another one of these series, please, soon, because Con was amazing, and just seeing the work that went into it and kind of getting some of those insights was really special. So really, really appreciated that. And we really appreciate all of you for listening. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. We really appreciate all of you. Please check out the Positively Trek discussion group on Facebook. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. And if you'd like, send us an email, positivelytrek@gmail.com. But most importantly, in everything you do and experience over the next little while, make sure to stay positive. Positively Trek is produced and edited by me, Dan Gunther, and co-produced by Barry DeFord on Treaty 8 territory, the home of the Beaver, Cree, Dene, and Métis people, whose histories, languages, and cultures we respect. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations.
See you